Over the Garden Wall is shrouded in mystery, from its cryptic opening to its dark woodland setting known only as the unknown. And yet, as much as the unknown is a place of mystery, it is equally a place of familiarity. Wirt and Greg begin the series lost in the wood. We don't know how they got there, and it appears neither did they. But there's this uncanny feeling that we've been here before. Snow White, Babes in the Wood, Hansel and Gretel. The idea of children lost in the wood is one of the most familiar fairy tale conventions, and Over the Garden Wall even makes explicit reference to several of these stories. Similarly, the fairy tale idea of a human cursed into animal form is equally so familiar that, when it's revealed that Beatrice is afflicted with such a curse, it might feel like we knew this all along.
You used to be human? Did I know that? I don't think I knew that.
Regarding the story, the audience may be just as lost as the characters, but contextually, culturally, we know exactly where we are. And as the Germanic fairy tale structure gives way to nostalgic Americana, it only becomes more familiar, with its harvest folklore and ghost stories evoking 19th century music, nursery rhymes, and early cartoons. So, if the unknown is meant to be so mysterious, why is it so familiar? Well, like many tales that use the woodland setting, the woods of Over the Garden Wall are a place of transition. The half moon, the falling leaves, the shift of autumn to winter as we cross a river. A place that is defined by a kind of liminality, existing between thresholds. Particularly as we later find that while on this journey through the woods, Wirt and Greg were really drowning, the unknown has been primarily categorised as a space between life and death, with its macabre imagery extending even further than the shadows of the wood.
Oh well, you'll join us someday.
But I want to look at how this threshold meets another, that of adolescence, the transition between childhood and adulthood, or reconciling a shifting identity. The question of identity has been present since the very opening of the first episode, as Greg struggles to name his frog. A struggle that continues throughout the series.
Hey, where'd Dr. Cucumber go?
But it's in the tavern that ideas of identity become undeniably apparent. Most obvious, of course, is that the tavern's visitors are not only comfortable in their roles, but are defined by them. The butcher, the baker, the midwife, the master, the apprentice, the tailor, the tavern keeper, and the highwayman. And they try to assign similarly reductive archetypes to Wirt, the fool or the young lover. And while his ultimate description as the pilgrim speaks to Wirt's journey or struggle towards adult identity and taking responsibility, a transformation evidently central to the series, that's not the only identity we see formed here. This episode, this whole series, is equally evocative of a cultural identity, the formation of this identity. And while every episode pays homage to early storytelling, this episode is dominated by perhaps the oldest, live performance and song, with a total of 4 or 5 songs in the episode, depending on whether you count Wirt's song, which is debatable.
So we can be on our...
We associate these fairy tales, folk stories and cartoons with childhood, but I think the preoccupation here is not as much with childhood specifically as it is with the early stages of something. The idea of forging identity, whether that's a person with the stories and morals we learn through fairy tales, the stories themselves with vocal performance at the birth of storytelling or early cartoons at the birth of film, or even the inception of a community, the folk stories and traditions that shaped them. And this is where ideas of identity meet the threshold of life and death, the things that are unavoidably entwined with the past but continue to shape our present. Like the show's opening vignettes, which, according to series creator Patrick McHale, was supposed to feel like a series of recalled memories. The montage is positioned as both past and future, evoking recalled memories but also foreshadowing what we have yet to see. But there's another conflict playing out here, one that I actually think is even more pervasive in the series than that of life and death. In speaking about these oppositions, McHale has said that maybe it's not only about life and death, maybe it's also about reality versus fantasy, and about dreams versus wakefulness. This dichotomy of reality and fantasy, or alternatively, truth and lies, persists throughout the narrative. Most obviously in the advice Wirt and Greg receive, which, although rarely malicious, is based in miscommunication, subsequently leading to characters and situations that aren't what they first appear. But the idea of truth and lies, or fantasy and reality, goes further than just these interactions. There's a recurring motif of costume and performance. Jimmy stuck in the gorilla suit, the frog disguised on the riverboat. Even the clothes in which Wirt and Greg are introduced are revealed to be Halloween costumes. And finally, the actors, or characters, or maybe both, are credited as the players, which draws attention to the idea of performance while also, at least for me, evoking the iconic line from Shakespeare's As You Like It, that all the world's a stage. And I think this is where the idea of lying, in a negative sense, begins to transform into the more positive connotations of fantasy. And the lines between truth or reality and lies or fantasy are not only blurred, but instead the very importance of this distinction is brought into question. As Wirt and Greg wake up when they leave the unknown, it might be assumed that their journey wasn't real if it weren't for the ringing bell inside the frog. But rather than a simple fantasy, the bell suggests that the place Wirt and Greg travel to may be false on one level, but it's real on another. What the final song terms the loveliest lies of all. These folk tales and fictions that become personally and culturally meaningful, reconfiguring the unknown from something fearful into something hopeful, and that we each have a choice, whether to feed the fear or to face it and take responsibility. For Beatrice, Wirt and Greg, going home means taking responsibility. Beatrice for provoking the curse that turned her family into bluebirds, Wirt for not taking care of Greg and his feelings for Sarah, and Greg for stealing the rock facts rock from Mrs. Daniels' garden. And speaking of Greg's rock facts,
Did you know that if you soak a raisin in grape juice, it turns into a grape? It's a rock fact!
what Greg says isn't true, but they're not so much lies as they are imaginative stories that instill a fantastical narrative into mundane objects, or just areas of knowledge that aren't exactly complete, just like fairy tales and folklore.
Did you know that dinosaurs had big ears, but everyone forgot because dinosaur ears don't have bones?
No.
That's because it's not true. It's a rock fact.
When asked about the truth of the unknown, Patrick McHale concluded by saying, "Maybe all of your memories are lies, maybe everything you perceive is a lie, but you have to believe in something, right?" Over the Garden Wall exists in the space between many thresholds, life and death, past and present, fantasy and reality, familiar and unfamiliar, the known and the unknown, and these thresholds seem to move freely. Certainty is traded for ambiguity and nuance. Just as you think you might know your path, something prevents you from moving forward. And while our lantern allows us to see, the light only shines so far. The epilogue provides us with our happy endings, but it also shows that, just as these characters were part of Wirt and Greg's story, Wirt and Greg were part of theirs. And that even when we return to reality, these stories shape that reality, and will always have their place. Hey everyone, thank you for watching. There's so much that can be said about this series, and so much that has been said, and of course people have pointed out these references before, but I hadn't seen anyone really talking about the implications of them, so I thought these musings might be worth contributing. If you have any thoughts, please do leave them down in the comments, and I hope I'll see you next time.